Okay, hello everyone. This one took me a while longer than I had thought. It's a combination and rewrite of my other Allosaur stories. I thought it would be better if I made them one solid story, and a long one at that. Once again, I apologize it took me so long to release this. I just wanted it to be good and most of all enjoyable. I thank you for your patience and trust in me that I will do a good job at it. One last thing before the story. If you feel like you want to support me or give my confidence an exaggerated boost, you could subscribe to this channel. But if you don't want to, then don't feel inclined. Okay, I won't harp on any longer. Enjoy.
The air hung thick and humid around the ancillary structures of Jurassic Park. The specific scent of Island Nublar, a mix of jungle decay, ozone from perimeter fences, and the underlying, slightly acrid tang of large animal waste, was particularly strong here, among the service roads and utilitarian buildings. Robert Muldoon adjusted the strap of his rifle, a familiar weight against his shoulder, and tried not to let his stride lengthen too much. He was walking with John Hammond, and Hammond, even on a mission he deemed important, set his own deliberate pace. They skirted a row of heavy-duty generators, their low thrum a constant presence. Further on, forklift trucks sat idle near stacks of reinforced steel mesh and lengths of high-tension cable. This was the park's engine room, messy and functional, a stark contrast to the manicured visitor areas Hammond envisioned. For Muldoon, it was the real heart of the operation, the place where the thin veneer of control was maintained by constant vigilance and brute force engineering. Just here, Robert, Hammond said, gesturing vaguely toward a cluster of lesser-used sheds near the eastern perimeter. His cream suit, despite the humidity, remained remarkably unwrinkled, though a fine sheen of sweat had begun to form on his brow. I wanted to show you the schematics we're considering for the secondary fencing upgrades. Muldoon squinted in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. The Hypsilophodon, sir? Ah, yes, the Hypsies, Hammond chuckled, a sound that always struck Muldoon as being slightly out of place in a facility populated by resurrected predators. Such delightful little creatures, aren't they? Agile, quick, perhaps a little too agile, it seems. Muldoon stopped, turning to face Hammond fully, though keeping one eye scanning the tree line. Too agile by half, sir. Miller reported sightings again yesterday. 2 males, right up the trunk of that erythrina tree, almost 20 feet. They were testing the fence height? No question. Just watching them, you could see they were calculating the jump. Yes, the reports reached me this morning, Hammond said, waving a hand dismissively, as if batting away a fly. Hence the schematics. We need to address this. They're not a threat, of course, but the optics of a guest seeing a creature, no matter how small, attempting to escape. Well, it's not ideal. Optics be damned, sir, Muldoon replied, his voice flat. It's a containment breach waiting to happen. If they figure out they can clear the fence, even into the next paddock, that's uncontrolled movement. The fence is supposed to be a barrier, not a suggestion. We designed for their size, their known behavior, ground-dwelling herbivores. We didn't account for arboreal ambition. Well, we must adapt, mustn't we? Hammond said, reaching into his jacket pocket for a folded set of blueprints. He fumbled slightly, his fingers less nimble than they once were. Dr. Wu suggested increasing the height by another 5 meters, and perhaps a concave curve inward at the top, much like a prison fence. Render the jump impossible. Muldoon took the blueprints, his gaze immediately flicking to the technical specifications. 5 meters helps, sir, but they're strong climbers. That erythrina has thick bark. The curve is good, standard secure perimeter practice. But their agility, they're lightweight. They can gain purchase where a larger animal couldn't. My recommendation remains the same as last week. Trim back all vegetation within 15 meters of the fence line, completely remove any tree that offers a direct launch point, and supplementary deterrents below the fence lip. A low-voltage wire, perhaps, just enough to give them a shock when they start climbing. Hammond frowned slightly, pulling his spectacles down his nose to peer at the prints. A low-voltage wire? For Hypsilophodon? Robert, that seems excessive. And the aesthetics, cutting back the jungle around their habitat. It will look rather barren. It will look secure, sir, Muldoon countered, handing the prints back. Aesthetics are secondary to containment. They're showing intelligence, problem solving. They're adapting to the environment we put them in. If we don't adapt faster, we lose control. 5 meters in a curve is a reaction. Trimming back foliage and adding a low deterrent is preemption. It removes their method of ascent. It's the difference between building a higher wall and removing the ladder. Hammond sighed, tapping the blueprints against his palm. Yes, I understand the principle. Very well. Consult with Henry on the deterrent specifics. But the foliage. Let's perhaps only trim the absolute necessities, shall we? We want the guest to feel immersed in a primordial jungle, not standing on the edge of a clear cut. Muldoon bit back a retort. The perennial conflict, safety versus spectacle. He simply nodded. I'll draft the revised work order. They continued walking, the path turning from cracked asphalt to a gravel track. The oppressive heat seemed to magnify the buzzing of insects. Muldoon caught the distant, eerie call of a Parasaurolophus. It sounded mournful. And then there's the matter of the Dimetrodon, Hammond said after a moment of quiet, his tone shifting, losing some of its bluster. Muldoon felt a prickle of unease. This was the problem he truly disliked discussing. Has there been another incident, sir? 3 more reported kills overnight, Hammond confirmed, his voice low. Near the southern ravine. 3 ate less. Adult males, by the look of the remains. 8 less, or spider monkeys. Native to Island Nublar, a small population integrated into the island's ecosystem long before InGen arrived. The Dimetrodon paddock bordered a section of relatively untouched jungle in that area. That makes 7 in the last fortnight, Muldoon calculated aloud. All within a kilometer of the Dimetrodon fence line. Precisely, Hammond said, stopping again and looking out towards the dense, emerald wall of the jungle. Dr. Wu is perplexed. The Dimetrodon enclosure is secure. The fence is rated for much larger, stronger animals. The environmental sensors show no breaches, no power fluctuations. We've checked the ground for tunnels, for washouts. Nothing. And the Dimetrodon themselves? Muldoon pressed. Are they agitated? Showing signs of stress? Are their feed levels being met? All within parameters, Hammond said, sighing again. They're being fed their standard ration of goat carcasses. No signs of significant stress or unusual behavior within the paddock. Yet, the monkeys. Muldoon ran a hand over the smooth, worn wood of his rifle stock. Dimetrodon, the sailback synapsids from the Permian. Not dinosaurs at all. A fact Muldoon knew bothered Wu slightly, but impressive and formidable nonetheless. They were housed in an enclosure meant to replicate a drier, more open environment than much of the island, complete with large heat lamps simulating the equatorial sun they never actually evolved under. Are the monkeys getting in, sir? Muldoon posited. Perhaps finding a way through the fence? Seeking something? Water scarcity elsewhere? Environmental readings across the island are stable, Hammond refuted. Plenty of water, plenty of native forage. And why would they repeatedly enter an area patrolled by large, carnivorous reptiles? It's counterintuitive for such intelligent primates. Nature isn't always intuitive, sir, Muldoon said dryly. Especially when we've introduced elements that haven't existed for 270 million years. Could their scent be attracting the Dimetrodon? Is there a particular time of day this is happening? Night? Dawn? The initial kills were discovered in the mornings, Hammond admitted. The latest were found by the night patrol. Hard to say exactly when they occurred. We need to implement a more rigorous monitoring protocol, Muldoon stated. Concentrate night vision cameras along that section of the perimeter. Deploy thermal drones at twilight and dawn. Check the fence integrity manually, every meter, looking for subtle signs, bent wires, disturbed earth, anything the automated sensors might miss. And we need to study the Dimetrodon gut contents from their waste, see if we can identify monkey remains directly, confirm the kills are definitely by them, and not some other opportunistic predator we haven't accounted for, or even unlikely as it is, the monkeys simply dying near the fence. Excellent points, Robert, Hammond said, a rare moment of genuine respect in his voice. Deploy the resources. Get the drone teams on it immediately. I'll arrange for Dr. Wu's team to examine the waste samples. This simply cannot continue. The native fauna must be protected, of course, but again, if this were to get out, questions would be asked about our ability to manage the island's existing ecosystem alongside the park. Muldoon nodded. The truth was, while the ecological impact was concerning, the greater worry was the Dimetrodon were somehow breaching containment, or that their enclosure was attracting native animals in a way that would lead to further problems. A hungry Dimetrodon that learned prey was available outside its fence was a risk. They walked on in silence for a few minutes, the problems hanging in the air between them. The Hypsilophodon, small but persistent. The Dimetrodon, larger, more dangerous, and the mystery of the monkey kills. Unresolved issues, both highlighting subtle weaknesses in their carefully constructed world. Hammond stopped again, this time near a large, empty loading bay. His posture straightened, and the lines of concern on his face smoothed out, replaced by that familiar, visionary glint in his eye. "But enough unpleasantness, Robert," he said, clapping his hands together softly. "I have some rather exciting news. The board has approved the next phase of species acquisition." Muldoon felt his stomach clench. Another species? When they were already wrestling with basic containment and unforeseen ecological interaction. "Sir, what species are we considering?" Hammond beamed, his eyes alight. "We're bringing over an Allosaurus." The air seemed to grow heavier. Muldoon felt a cold knot forming in his chest. "An Allosaurus," he repeated, the name feeling heavy and dangerous on his tongue. Allosaurus fragilis. Late Jurassic. A formidable theropod, smaller than a T. Rex, perhaps, but known pack hunters, incredibly powerful, armed with serrated claws and teeth. "Yes," Hammond practically chirped. "Not homegrown here on Nublar, but from Site B. A magnificent specimen, almost full-grown, about 7 meters long. Wu's team has completed the genetic sequencing and growth acceleration. It's reached sub-adult maturity and is, well, it's impressive. Truly a centerpiece predator for Phase 2. Isla Sorna, the production facility. Less controlled, wilder. Animals that were born in sterile labs and carefully managed nurseries. They were released into suitable environments on the island to essentially grow and one day maybe be chosen for the park. The SS Venture is being refitted as we speak," Hammond said. "Specialized containment module. Anesthetizing protocols are established. We've transported animals before. We've transported one animal before, sir. Our Tyrannosaur. This is also a top-tier carnivore. An apex predator from a less controlled environment. We haven't even solved the problems with the Dimetrodon, with the Hypsilophodon figuring out how to climb." Robert, calm yourself," Hammond said gently, though his expression held a hint of impatience. "I wish to discuss with you where we should house our new arrival. I'm thinking located in the eastern sector, away from the main visitor flow initially." "Sir, it's a mistake." Muldoon was struggling to maintain his professionalism. His mind was already racing, triple redundant fences, reinforced gates, constant monitoring, emergency protocols for a Category 5 escapee. The sheer operational burden was immense. "We are still in the build-up phase. Minor animals are finding weaknesses. A Permian reptile is hunting native species, and you want to introduce a 7-meter-long, potentially pack-hunting, late Jurassic carnivore. It is one specimen, Robert," Hammond said, his tone firming. "Wu assures me it's a solitary individual they've been observing. She's robust and very healthy. Apparently, she's been taking to the local population of baby hadrosaurs and has even been seen taking on the stegosaurs. She's a beauty. Sir, I'm on board, but I can't help thinking we're moving too fast," Muldoon pointed out grimly. "We don't know its temperament, its learned behaviors from that environment. It could be more aggressive, more unpredictable than an animal raised in isolation here." "You will take every precaution," Hammond insisted, stepping closer. "After all, you are the one now in charge of this operation. This is your area of expertise, Robert. Ensuring those precautions are watertight. I trust you implicitly on that. This is happening. This Allosaur is coming. Your job, as warden, is to ensure it arrives safely and is contained securely, no matter how long it takes." Muldoon looked at Hammond, seeing the unwavering conviction in his eyes, the the slightly childish excitement that always overwhelmed the practical concerns. He knew Hammond was like this, an excited child that sometimes disregarded rules for entertainment. Hammond had made up his mind. "Very well, sir," Muldoon said, his voice heavy with resignation. "It's against my professional recommendation at this stage of operations, but I understand the decision has been made. I'll make it happen." A genuine smile returned to Hammond's face. "Excellent, Robert. I knew you would see the necessity. This is a grand undertaking, a step forward. Imagine it. The roar of the Allosaurus echoing across the island. The photos the visitors will take. Right?" Muldoon said, turning away from the sheds and back towards the main compound where his Jeep was parked. The walk had taken longer than he'd anticipated, and now he had a mountain of new problems to consider on top of the existing ones. "If it's coming, sir, I need everything. The full genetic profile. Growth rates observed on Sorna. Observed behavior patterns. Hunting, social structure, if any, reaction to stimuli, anything anomalous. Dietary requirements. Preferred habitat temperature and humidity ranges. Everything Wu's team knows about this specific animal. And I need the transport details, cargo manifest, anesthetic schedule specifics, estimated transit time, arrival protocols down to the minute. I need schematics for the planned enclosure upgrades and the timeline for their completion. I need personnel assigned to the transport and the new enclosure briefed specifically on this animal. I need it today, sir." His tone was firm, leaving no room for debate. This was the professional taking over, accepting the inevitable but demanding the tools necessary to mitigate the risk, however unwelcome the task was. Hammond smiled. "Robert, my boy, yes, damn straight you will. You're the only man I trust to take control of this operation. What you need is yours. I'll have all available data of the Allosaur on your desk by the end of the day. Make it sooner," Muldoon said without slowing his pace. He needed to brief his rangers, review current security protocols, identify potential pinch points during transport and transfer. The Hypsilophodon and the Dimetrodon suddenly felt like minor annoyances compared to the looming shadow of an incoming Allosaurus from Site B. He reached his Jeep, the familiar keys cool and solid in his hand. He climbed in, the worn seat welcoming. As he started the engine, he glanced back. Hammond was still standing by the loading bay, a small, slightly frail figure surrounded by the industrial clutter of the park's underbelly, holding his blueprints, dreaming of the spectacle, while Muldoon was left to calculate the very real, very dangerous variables he was introducing. Muldoon put the Jeep in gear. The hum of the engine was a practical sound in a world increasingly filled with the roars of impossibilities. He had a lot of planning to do. The dinosaurs, it seemed, were determined to find every crack in their gilded cage, and Hammond was determined to keep filling that cage with ever more volatile residents. His job wasn't just about containment anymore. It was about anticipating every way nature, amplified and resurrected, would try to bite back against the hubris that it brought. 2 weeks later. "Careful with that load, lads," Muldoon called out, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of absolute authority derived from a lifetime spent managing the unpredictable. "Centering is key. We want minimal shift on impact." He checked his watch. 0800 sharp. InGen's logistics were usually precise, overly so, compensating for the inherent imprecision of their cargo. It was the subadult Allosaur, brought over from Isla Sorna. Both he and John had discussed 2 weeks earlier. Muldoon had read the reports. Site B was a chaotic nursery, less controlled than Nublar, where the animals matured in a wilder environment before selection and transfer to the park. This particular Allosaurus had apparently been a success, a skillful hunter, and quite healthy. That didn't surprise him. Theropods were inherently smart, sometimes too much for his liking. Intelligence, pack dynamics, or lack thereof, territoriality, it all added up to constant vigilance. A carnivore the size of a small bus, built like a predatory athlete. The crate settled with a heavy thud on the designated drop-off pad, just inside the outer perimeter of the enclosure. The pad was reinforced concrete, flush with the ground. Ahead of it lay the main enclosure, a vast expanse of dense jungle, artificial rocky outcrops, and a cleverly concealed feeding station. Between Muldoon and the crate stood the primary containment fence, 20 feet of heavy-gauge steel mesh, topped with angled outriggers carrying multiple strands of electrification. A sign nearby, mostly for show given the audience, warned, "Danger, 10,000 volts." Muldoon knew the actual voltage fluctuated based on system load, but the deterrent factor, even if only psychological for the men, was necessary. For the Allosaurus, well, it would be a physical demonstration of park rules. Muldoon stood near the newly reinforced main gate of Paddock 5, designated for the park's burgeoning collection of mid-sized theropods. The enclosure was a marvel of modern engineering. Towering fences woven with electrified cables, reinforced concrete footings sunk deep into the earth, thermal and motion sensors. But even the most sophisticated technology felt flimsy when measured against the raw power and ancient instincts of these creatures. Muldoon trusted the engineering to a point, but never enough to let his guard down. His Weatherby Mk. V-chambered in .458 Winchester Magnum was never far from reach, a cold, heavy reassurance against the limits of technology. "All right, release teams," Muldoon radioed, watching as the truck pulled away and a small crew in a reinforced utility vehicle approached the crate from the outside of the fence. Initiate remote sequence. There was a standard operating procedure for everything here. The crate was designed to be opened from a distance. Hydraulic latches, released via coded signal, would disengage, allowing a large panel door to swing open. A tense silence fell over the small assembly of men. Muldoon, his rifle now held across his chest, scanned the dense jungle beyond the drop-off pad. Instinct. Always assume the animal is watching, even when it shouldn't be. The next part was the most delicate. The crate had a remotely operated door release. A small, reinforced panel at the front, facing away from Muldoon and the crew, would slide open. It was designed to allow the animal a clear path into its new home without needing human presence nearby. A technician, young but sharp, confirmed the door release mechanism was armed. "Ready for command, Chief?" Muldoon nodded, never taking his eyes off the crate. "All right, door open." There was a soft click, a mechanical whirring sound from inside the crate. A narrow gap appeared, then widened as the door slid slowly open, revealing the darkness within. "All right, lads." Muldoon's voice calm but carrying. "Eyes on the target. Safety protocols on maximum. No shortcuts. This one's had a taste of the wild on Sorna. It's not a nursery specimen." A few nods from the crew, seasoned professionals, mostly ex-military or experienced handlers of dangerous modern animals. They knew the score, or thought they did. But Moluccan monitor lizards and lions weren't Allosaurs. Muldoon felt the familiar prickle of tension at the back of his neck. This was the moment the controlled environment of transport ended, and the truly unpredictable began. Nothing happened immediately. Muldoon didn't expect it to. Caution was standard for a creature in a new environment, especially after transport trauma. He gripped the rifle a little tighter, his knuckles white under the humid skin. He wasn't anticipating trouble now, but anticipation was key to survival. Always be ready. A flicker of movement in the darkness. A reptilian eye, catching the dim light. Slowly, deliberately, a massive head emerged, swiveling left and right, assessing. Muldoon felt a familiar tightening in his gut. This one felt different, more aware, calculating. Slowly, cautiously, the entire Allosaurus emerged. The subadult Allosaurus finally stepped out. Its body, robust and powerful, was indeed marked with striking patterns, bold stripes of deep black against a vibrant, almost jaundiced yellow hide. It was smaller than the Tyrannosaurus rex, but no less formidable. Built for speed and agility, with powerful hind limbs, large claws, and that distinctive, heavy skull suited for chopping flesh. It stood perhaps 5 feet tall at the hip, 12 feet long, a teenager really, and already a formidable predator. Silence. Taut, expectant silence. Seconds ticked by. Muldoon's hand rested lightly on the stock of his rifle, not raised, not threatening, just ready. He listened. The low, resonant thrumming of the fence power was audible if you focused. 10,000 volts. Enough to deter, to incapacitate, perhaps even kill, depending on the animal's size and the duration of contact. But pain thresholds varied. An instinct was a powerful driver. It was magnificent in a terrifying, brutal way. Its hide wasn't the dull greens or browns of the park's herbivores and smaller predators. This one bore the striking livery of a creature evolved to announce its presence, to warn, perhaps. Bold, orange body with thick stripes of a deep burnt black down its spine and black spots all over, almost just like a tiger. Its muscular legs, tipped with vicious claws, stepped onto the dirt. Its long, counterbalancing tail swished slowly, testing the air. It was perhaps 10 feet long from snout to tail tip, standing about 5 feet at the hip, substantially smaller than the T-Rex, but built for speed and tearing. Its skull was robust, its jaws lined with serrated teeth. It moved with a coiled energy, low to the ground, assessing. The Allosaurus took a few tentative steps away from the crate, its body facing towards the dense, artificial jungle of the enclosure. It sniffed the air, registering new scents, vegetation, earth, the distant tang of other dinosaurs, and the fainter, yet potent, scent of human. Muldoon stood positioned as planned, visible, confirming the barrier, asserting a presence without aggression. He was perhaps 30 yards away, separated by the final strand of the electric fence, elevated slightly on the maintenance platform. Confirmed. Lock the gantry, Muldoon said, his gaze fixed on the steel box. The transfer gate was being secure behind them. They were now isolated from the contained animal by only steel and electricity. It ignored the crate behind it, focusing entirely on the environment ahead, the forest line, the promise of cover and territory. Muldoon watched its posture, the subtle shifts in its weight, the tension in its muscles. It was keyed up, wary. Standard. Then the animal paused. Its body remained angled away, towards the freedom of the trees. But its head turned. It didn't whip around violently. Not at first. It pivoted slowly, deliberately on its powerful neck. The head rose slightly, the large, dark eyes under the bony crests fixing on Muldoon. In that moment, the world narrowed to the two of them. The vast enclosure, the waiting forest, the crew behind Muldoon, the hum of power, it all faded. There was only the ancient predator, its gaze locking onto the modern primate. Muldoon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the tropical heat. There was intelligence in those eyes. Not human intelligence, no, but something cold, calculating, and utterly alien. It wasn't just seeing a shape, it was seeing him, registering him, recognizing the source of the confinement, the disruption, the pain. Capture on Sorna wouldn't have been pleasant. It was taking a measure. And then something shifted. The calculating gaze ignited into pure, primal fury. The Allosaurus lowered its head slightly, neck muscles coiling. A sound ripped from its throat. Not a roar like the T-Rex, but a high-pitched, grating scream filled with rage and challenge. It was a sound designed to terrify, to paralyze. And then it charged. It wasn't a clumsy rush. It exploded from its stationary position with astonishing speed, covering the ground towards the workers in a blur of yellow and black stripes. Its powerful hind legs propelled it, its short clawed forelimbs outstretched, reaching, grasping at the air, separating it from its target. Muldoon didn't flinch. He held his position, feet spread, rifle held loosely at his side, pointed downwards. "Steady, lads," he said in a strong, commanding voice. He had faced charging animals before, but never one like this. Every instinct screamed at him to raise the .458, to put a thundering round into that charging mass. But he didn't. This wasn't a hunt. This was a controlled transfer, reliant on the technology holding. He had to trust the fence. He had to force himself to trust the fence, even as the screaming predator bore down on him. He felt the vibration of its heavy footfalls through the ground, saw the individual scales, the glint of teeth, the frantic movement of its claws. The distance closed with terrifying speed, 50 feet, 40, 30. The Allosaurus hit the fence with a metallic clang and a blinding flash of blue-white light. The sound was deafening, a brutal punctuation mark on the silence. Muldoon felt the sharp crackle of the discharge, even from his position. The animal's scream cut off abruptly, replaced by a choked gurgle. Its body spasmed violently, muscles contracting uncontrollably under the immense electrical jolt. Foaming saliva flew from its jaws. The momentum carried it forward slightly, even as the power coursed through it. It scraped against the fence, its claws finding no purchase on the smooth, taut wires. Then the jolt threw it back. It landed hard on its side on the gravel, a tangle of striped limbs and twitching muscle. Its tail thrashed once, 2 times, a slower, weaker movement. It lay there, panting heavily, steam rising faintly from its hide in the sudden cool of the enclosure. Muldoon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The air still tasted of ozone. His attention immediately shifted from the animal to the system. Status report. Fence integrity? Power panel readout, Miller, he barked, turning towards the technician who monitored the enclosure systems. Miller, a man whose usual calm demeanor was replaced by wide eyes and slightly trembling hands, adjusted his headset. He peered intensely at the monitor array showing real-time diagnostics. Chief, fence held. Full contact registered on Section 5 Alpha, lower cable group. Duration, 1.7 seconds. Discharge registered. 87.5% efficiency, Chief. Voltage dropped momentarily to 9,450, 48 amps pulsed. System compensated back to baseline 10,000 volts within 0.3 seconds. Power flow is stable. No breaches detected. 87.5% efficiency. 10,000 volts dropping to 9,450. Compensated within 0.3 of a second. Muldoon processed the numbers instantly. It meant a significant load, a powerful contact. It meant the system had worked as designed, but under considerable stress. 87.5% wasn't 100%. There was always a loss, a resistance, a point of potential failure. The drop, though brief, was a data point to be noted, analyzed. It worked this time. Muldoon nodded slowly. Understood, Miller. Keep monitoring all section feeds. Harris, recovery crate ready. The crane operator confirmed. The plan was to leave the main crate in place for a short period as a potential refuge, but a smaller, open-topped recovery crate was on standby if the animal needed medical attention or further handling. On the ground, the Allosaurus slowly began to push itself up. It was groggy, disoriented, but the powerful musculature was already protesting the electrical shock. It scrambled awkwardly onto its feet, shaking its head. Its movements were cautious now, wary. It didn't look towards Muldoon directly. Not first. It kept low, facing towards the trees again. For a moment, Muldoon thought it might retreat, seek cover, process the shock. But then it paused, and slowly, deliberately, it turned its head again. It didn't scream this time. It didn't charge. It just stood there, perhaps 20 yards inside the enclosure now, its yellow-striped body partially obscured by the burgeoning undergrowth, its head fully visible. And it looked directly at Muldoon. The gaze was different now. The raw fury had been tempered by pain and the shock of the jolt, but it hadn't extinguished the malice. It was cold, assessing again, but now layered with something deeper. Recognition. Resentment. Muldoon met its gaze directly. No aggression, no fear, just a professional, unwavering stare. A silent acknowledgement of the boundary, the power, the inherent conflict between their species. The Allosaurus held the stare for several long seconds. Muldoon could practically feel the ancient mind behind those eyes cataloging the experience, the pain, the source, the barrier. It understood. It wouldn't forget. Slowly, almost deliberately, the Allosaurus turned and padded silently into the denser foliage of the enclosure. The yellow and black stripes provided surprisingly effective camouflage as it melted into the shadows cast by the artificial canopy. But it didn't disappear completely. Muldoon could see glimpses of its hide through the leaves, glimpses of movement. It wasn't running away. It was retreating, yes, but only to observe. He knew, with a grim certainty that settled heavy in his gut, that it was watching them, watching the humans who had captured it, transported it, and subjected it to pain. It was learning the boundaries, measuring the threat, storing the experience. Muldoon lowered his rifle slightly, though his grip remained firm. He scanned the tree line, the movements of the striped predator. Miller's voice crackled in his ear, giving another status update. The technical readouts confirming the system was stable. Stable. For now. He looked out at the enclosure, at the place where prehistoric force met modern technology. The fence had held. The animal was contained. The procedure was technically a success, but as he watched the barely perceptible movements in the shadows, met the unseen gaze that he knew was fixed upon him, Muldoon felt no sense of triumph. Only the cold, hard knowledge that they had just made a very intelligent, very powerful, highly dangerous predator hostile. And it was now their neighbor, separated by only a few thousand volts of electricity. He walked a few paces away, pulling out his radio. He needed to report the incident. Standard protocol. Even when the standard protocol had held, the nature of the encounter was significant. Muldoon to control, he said into the mic static, then a familiar voice. Control, Arnold here. Go ahead, Robert. Ray Arnold, the park's chief engineer, a man Muldoon respected despite his sometimes exasperating reliance on systems and code rather than instinct and observation. Ray, the Allosaurus transfer is complete. Crate opened. Animal released into the enclosure. Excellent. Arnold's voice crackled back. Any issues during release? Muldoon paused for a fraction of a second. How much detail to provide? Just the facts. Keep it concise. Animal exited the crate, observed the environment, then charged the fence immediately upon making visual contact with personnel. Struck the primary fence. Full discharge initiated. Silence from the other end. Then assessment. Fence performed as specified, Muldoon stated. Contained the animal. Electrical deterrent incapacitated it temporarily. Note each. Animal has since retreated into the enclosure interior, but remains visible intermittently. Behavior is highly aggressive, beyond typical stress response. Direct charge. Arnold's voice was tighter when he responded. Highly aggressive. Noted. We'll update the monitoring parameters. Power grid holding steady. All systems green on the fence side. He sounded like he was typing. Muldoon pictured him, surrounded by monitors, cigarette dangling from his lip. Good, Muldoon said. Keep a close watch, Ray. This one is different. It looked right at me. Knew exactly what it was doing. Understood, Robert. We'll flag this animal in the system. Anything else? Muldoon glanced towards the trees, where he'd last seen a flicker of yellow and black. Just confirmation of success from this end. The animal is contained within the primary enclosure. Confirmed. Successful deployment. Arnold repeated, the professional tone returning. Nedry's here, heard the report. Muldoon felt a shift in the air, even over the radio. Dennis Nedry, the park's lead programmer. A man Muldoon fundamentally mistrusted. Too smart by half, lazy, and with a perpetual air of grievance about his compensation. He was the single biggest vulnerability in the entire system, in Muldoon's estimation. All those complex computer systems, all that expensive biotech, all reliant on a disgruntled and underpaid programmer. It gave Muldoon the creeps. Nedry, Muldoon acknowledged flatly. He heard a faint sound from Arnold's end. A chew? Swallowing? Nedry didn't speak. Muldoon pictured him sitting there, hunched over a keyboard or a snack, listening but saying nothing. Nedry rarely had anything constructive to say unless it was a complaint about his workload or pay. His silence now, after a report of an aggressive incident that tested primary containment, it felt heavy, ominous even. All right, Ray, Muldoon said, deciding not to press the issue of the silent programmer. We'll be monitoring here visually and via the sensors. Report back if anything changes. Will do, Robert. Control out. Muldoon lowered the radio, but his gaze remained fixed on the dense jungle. The Allosaurus wasn't just another addition to the park's roster. It was a problem, a test, a predator that had looked him in the eye and seen an enemy. He gripped his rifle again, the weight familiar and reassuring. The park was full of wonders, brilliant science, and unparalleled excitement. It was also built on a foundation of terrifying power and profound arrogance. And his job was to stand on the edge of that abyss, armed with training, a rifle, and a healthy dose of skepticism, and keep the monsters from reminding the humans just how fragile their control truly was. The Allosaurus was out there now, a moving shadow of yellow and black, licking its wounds, both physical and psychological, learning. It wouldn't forget hitting that fence. And Muldoon knew, with a certainty that chilled him slightly in the humid air, that it wouldn't forgive either. The coming months will show if the Allosaur will acquire to its new habitat. The humid air of Isla Nublar hung thick and heavy, tasting of damp earth and decaying vegetation. It pressed in on the reinforced glass of the olive-drab Jeep Wrangler as Robert Muldoon navigated the winding dirt road. The road itself was less a feat of civil engineering and more a persistent scar carved into the vibrant, untamed jungle. Red clay churned soft by recent rain, overhung with dripping fronds and ancient, buttressed roots that threatened to reclaim the path entirely. Beside him, Dr. Alan Grant was the picture of quiet intensity. His usual dusty field clothes seemed slightly out of place against the high-tech backdrop of the vehicle's dashboard, but his focus was unwavering. He wasn't looking at the monitors or the Jeep's controls. His gaze was fixed on the blur of green passing outside, occasionally scanning the tree line as if expecting something primordial to emerge. He was a man constantly sifting through the present for clues about the impossible past, and Jurassic Park offered that past in terrifying, breathing reality. Muldoon flicked a switch, activating the park's internal radio. Static hissed briefly before a clipped voice responded. "Checkpoint Bravo, proceed." "Bravo copies, proceeding," Muldoon replied, his voice calm and professional, the slight lilt of his South African accent a familiar constant in the park. He steered the Jeep through a heavy steel gate that stood incongruously in the middle of the wilderness. A couple of park security personnel, young and looking slightly jumpy in their green uniforms, stood by a small, prefabricated hut. They nodded respectfully at Muldoon, barely glancing at Grant. The gate groaned open, and they drove through. "Standard procedure," Muldoon said, glancing at Grant. "Layers of redundancy. More gates than you could shake a stick at. Keeps the public out, and everything else while mostly in." Grant offered a non-committal grunt, his eyes still scanning. He appreciated the pragmatism, even if the entire concept of keeping this and seemed ludicrously optimistic to his paleontologist's mind. They drove for another 10 minutes, the road worsening, the jungle closing in tighter. The air grew heavier, the sounds of distant birds and insects occasionally punctuated by something deeper, a rumble or a cry that spoke of larger presences. Another gate loomed ahead, more imposing this time. Concrete barriers flanked it, topped with coils of razor wire. A guard tower rose beside it, equipped with cameras and thermal sensors. 2 guards were visible, one in the tower, one by a control panel. Muldoon brought the Jeep to a halt. He held a card up to a scanner beside the gate. A red light blinked, then turned green. He keyed a code into a keypad. "Warden Muldoon, Sector Gamma access, clearance A1. The guard by the panel spoke into a mic. "Copy, Warden. Gate opening. DR." Grant confirmed on roster. The heavy gate began to grind open. As they passed through, Muldoon gave the guards a brief, curt nod. "Getting further off the beaten track now," Muldoon commented as the gate closed behind them with a clang that resonated through the jungle. "This sector isn't on the public tour." Grant finally turned from the window, his gaze sharp. "Sector Gamma. That's where." He trailed off, but Muldoon knew exactly what he meant. "Yes, that's right," Muldoon confirmed, gripping the steering wheel. "Where we keep the Allosaurus. We acquired a few months back." 3 months ago, you said it was still relatively small," Grant prompts, his voice low. "It was," Muldoon agreed. "Maybe 7, 8 meters then. It's grown considerably. We estimate it's pushing 11 meters now. Still a subadult, mind you. Nowhere near full size if geneticists are to be believed." Grant felt a familiar tingle of pure, unadulterated wonder mixed with a healthy dose of scientific curiosity. An Allosaurus fragilis brought back to life. A dominant late Jurassic predator. Seeing a Tyrannosaurus had been profound. Seeing a different branch of the theropod evolutionary tree, alive, developing, it was a gift and a terror wrapped into one. He kept his expression neutral, a mask of academic interest, but inside his mind was a whirlwind of bone structures, muscle attachments, and predatory behaviors. 11 meters, Grant repeated, letting the number sink in. A formidable size for a subadult. How has it adapted? Muldoon navigated a particularly deep rut in the road. Remarkably well. Actually, found its niche quickly. We established a large enough enclosure, good mix of forest and open ground. It seems content. And feeding? Grant asked. This was where theoretical paleontology met brutal reality. Efficiently, Muldoon said, a clinical edge to his voice. We maintain a stock of bovine, mostly bulls. Easier to manage than introducing wild prey, and controllable. We feed at a regular cycle. Introductions are done remotely, of course. Bulls. Grant raised an eyebrow slightly. Any particular reason? Size. Partially size, yes, Muldoon explained. Substantial meal. But mainly because they're readily available and... He paused, choosing his words carefully. We dehorn them. Don't need a half-ton of angry cattle with pointy bits charging the asset. Grant nodded, filing away the information. Efficient, controlled, dehorned. It spoke of attempts to mitigate variables, to make the unpredictable predictable. We've observed its behavior during feeding. Muldoon continued, his tone shifting slightly, revealing a grudging respect for the animal's nature. It doesn't just rush in for the kill. It plays with them, circles, feints, drives them into the open. Seems to enjoy the chase as much as the meal. It's quite intelligent in its own way. A calculating predator, not just a brute. That aligns with what we understand of large theropod neurology, Grant mused aloud, finally allowing a hint of his deep interest to surface. Complex behaviors, not just instinctual feeding. Problem-solving, strategy. It processes the bovine quickly once it decides to finish the game, Muldoon said. Dispatches them effectively. Doesn't waste time once it's decided. They drove on in silence for a few minutes, Grant absorbing the details. Muldoon focused on the treacherous road. The air conditioner in the Jeep hummed, a fragile barrier against the oppressive heat and the wildness outside. Grant found himself picturing the scene Muldoon described. The massive subadult Allosaurus, a creature extinct for 150 million years, stalking and toying with modern cattle under the watchful eyes of hidden cameras and technicians. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. Untried, Muldoon had called it. He didn't know the half of it. Grant felt a tremor of excitement, almost childlike in its intensity, but years of academic discipline kept his outward demeanor measured. The road finally opened into a small, cleared area. At the edge of the clearing stood a building, low and heavily fortified, thick concrete walls, minimal windows, a reinforced door. Cables snaked from it into the surrounding jungle. Adjacently, a high, multi-layered fence structure was visible, disappearing into the dense foliage. This was clearly the boundary of the Allosaurus enclosure. Control Shed Gamma, Muldoon announced, pulling the Jeep alongside the building. Similar setup to the Rex paddock, though scaled down slightly. 24/7 monitoring, full remote control of gates, fences, feeding systems. They got out of the Jeep. The air outside was immediately thicker, hotter, louder with the drone of insects. The faint, metallic tang of ozone from the shed's electronics mingled strangely with the earthy smell of the jungle. Muldoon opened the heavy door with another coded keycard. Inside, the shed was cool and brightly lit. The main room was dominated by banks of monitors displaying various camera angles of the enclosure, dense forest, a clearing, a watering hole. Consoles filled with buttons, switches, and trackballs lined the walls. Two technicians sat at the main console, eyes flicking between screens. They looked up as Muldoon entered, nodding deferentially. Afternoon, Warden, one of them said. Dr. Grant, all clear on the feeds. Asset is currently deep within the forest sector, inactive. Good, Muldoon replied, walking over to the console. Grant followed, his eyes immediately drawn to the monitors. He leaned forward, trying to decipher the pixelated images, searching for any sign of movement. We're going to demonstrate its retrieval protocol, Muldoon explained to Grant. Show you how we manage feeding, and, well, show you the asset itself. Prepare the feed sequence, Jenkins. The technician, Jenkins, nodded and began tapping commands into the console. Initiating bovine retrieval sequence. Gate 7 open. Bull confirmed entering transfer chute. On one of the smaller monitors, Grant saw a large, brown bull lumber awkwardly through a narrow corridor. It looked confused, blinking in the sudden light of the open enclosure beyond the gate. Opening enclosure access gate, Jenkins announced. A beep sounded, and the bull stepped out into a sun-dappled clearing visible on the main monitors. Silence descended in the control shed, broken only by the hum of equipment and the distant, muffled sounds of the jungle filtering through the thick walls. Outside, the bull stood still for a moment, twitching its tail, seemingly unaware of the primeval danger lurking nearby. Grant watched the screens, but his instincts as a field paleontologist told him to look elsewhere. He moved towards the reinforced window overlooking the enclosure, pressing his face close to the glass, trying to penetrate the visual noise of the forest. He knew how these animals preferred to hunt, using concealment, striking from ambush. Minutes stretched into an unnerving wait. The bull began to graze nervously. The technicians remained impassive, used to the routine. Muldoon stood beside Grant, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the tree line. Then, a ripple of movement deep within the green. Almost imperceptible at first, just a shadow detaching itself from the background. It moved with incredible speed and grace for something so large, a blur of earthy tones against the vibrant flora. "There," Muldoon said quietly, though it was hardly necessary. The blur resolved itself into the unmistakable shape of a massive theropod. It burst from the forest line nearest the bull, not with a roar, but with a sudden, explosive charge that sent squawks and screeches echoing through the trees. It was magnificent and terrifying. 11 meters of scaled muscle, lean and powerful. Its skull was broad, adorned with the distinctive crests above its eyes, the very feature that gave Allosaurus its name, different lizard. Its jaws were slightly agape, revealing rows of serrated teeth designed for shearing flesh. The bull barely had time to react. With shocking speed, the Allosaurus was upon it. It didn't go for the throat or a killing bite immediately. Instead, with surgical precision, it snapped forward, its powerful jaws closing on one of the bull's hind legs just below the hip. There was a sickening crunch, audible even through the control room walls, followed by a bellow of pain from the bull. The bull collapsed on 3 legs, thrashing desperately. The Allosaurus held its grip for a moment, then released, allowing the crippled animal to stumble and fall. It circled its incapacitated prey with deliberate steps, head low, those crested eyes watching, assessing. It nudged the bull with its snout, a gesture that seemed almost casual, utterly devoid of malice, yet steeped in predatory dominance. It was the play Muldoon had described, chilling in its detached efficiency. Grant watched, mesmerized and horrified in equal measure. This wasn't a museum exhibit. This was a living, breathing engine of destruction, perfectly evolved for its task. He had studied their bones, their bite marks on fossilized prey, but nothing compared to the raw power and intelligence displayed before him. The creature was thriving, as Muldoon had said. It was a perfect, terrible success story, but something still felt off. There was a tension in the air, a quiet anxiety that the sheer spectacle of the kill couldn't entirely mask. He turned to Muldoon, lowering his voice. "Remarkable," Grant said, not without genuine awe. "Perfectly adapted. Efficient. So, what's the problem, Muldoon? Why bring me here? What aren't you telling me about the Allosaurus?" Muldoon opened his mouth to reply, but the sound that came next drowned him out. It started as a low tremor deep within the earth, a vibration that resonated through the concrete floor of the control shed and up through their feet. It grew rapidly, coalescing into a sound that was both familiar and utterly primeval, the unmistakable, earth-shaking roar of a Tyrannosaurus rex. It wasn't close. It was miles away, somewhere on the other side of the island, faint enough that the technicians didn't even flinch, used to the dominant predator's vocalizations carrying across the park. But for the Allosaurus in the enclosure, it might as well have been right beside it. The 11-meter predator, which moments before had been the picture of confident dominance over its crippled prey, froze. Its head snapped up, away from the bull, towards the distant source of the sound. Its crested eyes widened, fixing on some unseen point in the distance. Then it screamed. It wasn't a roar of challenge or a cry of aggression. It was a high-pitched, desperate shriek of pure, unadulterated terror, a sound that ripped through the air and scraped against the nerves. The sound of a creature utterly, abjectly terrified. The Allosaurus didn't hesitate. It didn't look back at the bull, which lay bleeding and forgotten in the clearing. It didn't consider the potential meal. It turned with frantic, scrambling speed and launched itself back into the dense forest from which it had emerged, a flash of scales disappearing into the undergrowth, as if the devil himself were on its heels. The sounds of its panicked flight, crashing through brush, snapping branches, faded quickly. Silence returned to the clearing, broken only by the pathetic whimpers of the injured bull. Muldoon stood beside Grant, his arms still crossed, his expression grim. He didn't need to explain. The sight, the sound, the sudden instinctual flight spoke volumes. That, Muldoon said, his voice flat, heavy with the weariness of someone dealing with a problem he couldn't solve. That's the problem, Dr. Grant. It hears the Rex, even from miles away, and it's scared to death of it. Grant stared out at the empty clearing, at the abandoned, dying bull. He thought of the powerful, confident predator he had just witnessed, reduced to a cowering, fleeing animal.
Thank you for watching. I hoped you found it interesting and enjoyable. Cheers and have a great day.